Seeking Daylight Part 1 Journey to the Underhill Gates. Narrated by Millian Quinteros. Chapter 4 Peculiar Lodgings. "What in the world?" Sophie whispered. Lewis turned at the sound of her voice, finding her staring at something in the distance. He followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing. They had fallen into a cave or tunnel of sorts. At its top and in the distance was a small crack. That is to say that it appeared just a small crack from their particular perspective. Up close it may very well have been a gaping chasm. This crack gave way to the only noticeable beam of dim light. As Lewis followed its path downward, his gaze landed on the beam's destination, an enormous old oak. He imagined it must have been hundreds of years old by its girth. It towered above the hole where they had entered the room, its boughs still not yet close to scraping the cavern's top, and the base of its trunk concealed by a ridge leading away from the waterline and upward toward higher ground. Slowly the three friends lumbered back to their feet and began the short climb over the hard-packed dirt hill. Lewis's steps sped up with anticipation, reaching the top first, and affording him a brief, solitary glance towards something the likes of which he had never seen before. The base of the tree was quite some ways off in the distance, maybe a mile or more, and far below the berm on which he now stood. Its height and girth was at least twice his initial estimation. Around the tree, at its trunk, stood a nearly perfect circle of tall, flowing green and yellow grasses. Yet, at its outer edges there was only barren ground. The concentration of light had created a lush oasis in an otherwise barren underground. "Amazing," Sophie whispered, sneaking up on Lewis as she emerged atop the ridge beside him. "What is all this?" added Owen. Lewis shrugged his shoulders and did his best to answer, trying aloud to make some sense of the questions his eyes were raising for himself. "Not sure. I've heard of cities that had been built on top of other older cities. Their names changed, like they never had existed at all. I've seen pictures in books, but nothing like this." Maybe this is Darwin, whatever that was. He remembered the passage from his father's notebook. He reached for it in his pack, but everything was soaked through. He did not dare disturb its pages for fear that they might become illegible. No, it was best to let it dry out first, if they could wait that long. In the meantime, the three of them had better move. It wasn't going to do them any good standing there wet and freezing in the dark. At the bottom of the ridge in front of them was a path, as good a place as any to start toward the light. If they moved quickly, they should be able to reach it in about 10 minutes. Perhaps they might even find a way back up top. The three began their descent. It would be a short, miserable walk. They had very little light to navigate by and were soaked to their cores. Cold, wet, and lost. More lost than they ever could have imagined. As their footing leveled, the thin grass at their feet became tall and dense. The huge, dimly lit tree served as a beacon, directing their movement. Each step was more tedious than the last. Owen took the lead, spreading the grass with his hands and holding one side with his foot so the others could pass, alternating the task with Lewis. Sophie kept between them step by step until they had finally reached a spot where they could get a good look at their destination. The grass around where the tree stood had become sparse and considerably shorter again. It eventually disappeared below their feet, replaced instead by dried, dead leaves in browns, reds, and yellows. Their musty smell was familiar, like Halloween. The crisp leaves reached well over their knees, making it terribly difficult to walk. The muscles in their legs burned more and more with each step, slowing their pace considerably as they churned forward. "I need a break, Louie," Sophie called from behind. She had all but totally disappeared into the leaves as she flopped to the ground in dramatic fashion. "Yeah, Lou, hold up a second, will ya?" Owen played along, pretending to have been shot in the heart, staggering and then becoming stiff, arms to the side and falling like a tree onto his belly beside her. "Quit playing around, we're nearly there," Lewis urged the others, who grumbled behind him as they again struggled through the now waist-high leaves. He must have instructed them to do that very same thing at least 10 times, until they arrived just steps from where they could actually reach out and touch the massive trunk. It did not take long for them to realize that this was no usual tree. Not at all. It had to have been at least the size of the great redwoods Lewis had read about growing out west. He had seen them in pictures, some so big that holes had to be cut straight through them, the tree still standing tall, so that roads could pass through their middle. Yet, the sheer size of this particular tree wasn't its most amazing attribute. That distinction had to be kept for the perfectly square door that had been carved into its side. Not a usual hole where a door had been made first and then fastened later, but one actually made as part of the tree itself. Its hinges, the perfectly round knob, and its working latches and parts all appeared to have been carved into the tree as just one solid piece. "Should we knock?" Owen asked, but Lewis's hand was already on the knob. The door opened to a hallway, carved in the exact same shape and size as the door, which led to the tree's very center, and opened to a slightly larger circular room. There were places to sit and things emerging from the walls and floor, along with a basin for washing up. All were carved into the tree itself. In fact, the only thing that appeared not to have been built this way was a small fire pit in the very center of the chamber, constructed from stacked stones like those they had sat on by the lagoon. There was an iron pot for cooking, suspended from 4 sticks, placed equidistant from one another at the outside of the pit and meeting at its center. Above this was a round hole that had been bored into the ceiling, stained at its edges by the smoke that passed through it at one time. Lewis could smell the ash, old and stale. Owen emerged in the doorway, a collection of twigs held in his arms. "We should try to build a fire." It was a good idea. They would likely catch cold if they didn't dry their soaked clothes. Owen was a scout and had built fires before. He stood the dried twigs into the shape of a teepee and placed a few dried leaves underneath. Lewis unbuckled his pack and laid out its contents so they could dry by the fire. He found the Zippo at the bottom and flicked its hinged top open with a swing sound made by the scraping metal. He flicked his thumb on the small steel wheel, turning it against the flint and making a spark, but no fire. He tried again, shaking it in his hand first. Again, there was only a spark, followed by a small puff of black smoke. He blew air onto the frayed string wick, gave it another shake, and tried once more. This time the spark made a small flame that quickly became brighter. All 3 of them sighed in relief. He placed it where he could light the leaves, the fire spreading quickly among the dry twigs. Warmth. Sophie removed her hooded sweater and motioned to the boys to hand over theirs as well, taking them to the basin and wringing out the water before hanging them on a nearby chair to dry. Lewis removed his shoes and socks. The fire felt wonderful on his bare feet, and he could feel the rest of him beginning to dry out. Owen complained of being hungry, having expended more energy than he had become used to during their walk. Lewis was hungry too, but all he could find was an old pack of gum, shriveled and mangled from being wet, in his pocket. He offered what he had to both Owen and Sophie, who gladly accepted their meager midnight snack. The sweetness improved their mood, if only temporarily. Lewis broke the silence first. "We should make a plan for the morning, you know." "Oh yeah, go ahead, Louie. Let's hear what kind of plan you have for us this time. Maybe tomorrow we'll all be spending the night under a rock." Sophie spouted off her frustration. "Easy, arguing is not going to do us any good," Owen interjected. "I agree with Lou. We need a plan, and food." Sophie turned back to Lewis, twisting her sarcastic tone into his side a bit more. "Fine. What's the grand plan this time, Louie?" How was he to know? After all, this was the first time he had been in such a predicament himself. Sure, it was his foolishness that had gotten them all into this trouble. That much he'd admit. His friends were looking to him to get them out of this mess, and rightfully so, he supposed. He did his best to push his own fear out of sight, to put on a calm face and collected demeanor for the others. He would need to keep cool, keep them working together, even if that meant he would have to make it all up as he went along. "We'll need water first. I drank a bit on accident before. It tasted clean, but I can't be sure that it's safe. Owen and I will need to bring it back here to boil. Sophie, there must be something we can eat growing here by the tree. Maybe a berry patch or even dandelions if need be." "We can make soup," Owen piped in. Lewis nodded. "Owen, your mother will likely notice that you have not been to the cafeteria for breakfast tomorrow. It's only a matter of time before she sends someone to look for us in the dungeon and they notice the door is open in the well." Lewis tried to speak very matter-of-fact, although he was quite unsure anyone would ever bother to look inside the old well or notice the door was out of place if they had. "We will stay here a couple of days and keep the fire going. That light must be coming from someplace. Maybe that crack in the ceiling opened somewhere on the school property, Sophie added. It would look quite strange as smoke was coming out of the ground, I would think. What if it doesn't? What if no one comes looking for us at all? Owen rebutted. There must be a way out from here. Someone was clearly here at one time or another, but there isn't anyone around now. They had to have left somehow. We should spend at least part of our day looking for the exit, Lewis told them. But first the food and water. Owen wanted to be sure of that. Yes, first the food and water. That is our number one priority. For now, though, we should stoke the fire and get some rest. It's sure to be a long day of work, Lewis said. Owen obliged, grabbing from the pile of twigs he had placed beside them and stacking a few atop the coals. A billow of smoke rose from the fire, exiting through the hole in the ceiling, and finally out the stub of a branch that had been fashioned into a chimney outside, floating upward and dissipating into the darkness. Inside their newfound lodgings, each of the three picked a spot close to the fire, where they curled themselves and eventually drifted off to sleep. Can't wait to find out what happens next? No problem. You can grab the first 2 complete books now for free by visiting pjowen.com/free.